So we're going to go to the phone lines again, and I'm going to go ahead and take a call from, I hope I'm pronouncing this name correctly, Saya? Am I saying that right? Are you there?
Sia?
Sia?
Saya.
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 I don't know, I'll probably forget and mispronounce it again.
I'm not going to forget. I won't mispronounce it.
She's really good at remembering how to pronounce names. But hi, Saya. Where are you calling from? Where are you in the world?
I'm in Texas right now.
You're in Texas.
Oh, as well.
Fantastic. Which, West or East Texas? The dusty or the humid part?
Central.
Central. Kind of a mix
Like
between the two.
humid.
Okay. Gotcha.
How can we help you today?
I actually have a pretty good understanding of MBTI. I just have a few questions I'm trying to tie up on loose ends.
Sure.
I guess not a few questions, like one question of comparison. One thing I'm trying to make sure I have a good understanding of is loops. I want to know just for my understanding, because this is more because it took me a really long time to find my own type because of the nature of the environment that I grew up in, and to the point where you leave and you have to figure out who you are after that type of environment. So what I'm trying to figure out is I just want to make sure I'm understanding the difference between an INTJ loop, an INFJ loop, and an ISFP loop. The me-T, me-Fi, and the Fi-me loop.
Okay. So how do these loops compare and contrast with each other, or what are their characteristics, do you mean?
Right. Compare and contrast characteristics, yes.
Okay. So
you said INTJ. What were the three types?
INTJ, INFJ, and ISFP.
INFJ and ISFP.
All right. So one of the best ways to have a resource that will tell you about all of these loops is the Personality Hacker book, because the Personality Hacker book writes out a lot of different styles of looping as well.
Okay, cool.
Okay, cool.
That's one
Perfect.
Good place to start.
All right. So first
I did read it. It typed me as INTJ, and I've actually been suspecting that for a while, but
okay.
There were some things in there that it wasn't quite clear on the loops.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. So one of the things that is good to watch in loops is whether or not it's an incidental loop. It's just something that you're experiencing because you're having a bad day, or whether or not it's a loop that you're kind of living in. Like it's like an undercurrent, sort of like it doesn't feel as disruptive. It's not right, but it's more of like a chronic thing. Because there's different styles of looping
what
too.
Thing?
More of like a chronic loop, more of like a sort of an undercurrent of your life loop. So
okay.
So there's different kinds of loops too, right? As in like different sort of intensities and durations of how long the loop will last. So that's another thing, is if you're talking about like an incidental, in the moment, hard hitting loop where you're like, I can't even, versus or sort of like you've incorporated this way of being into your lifestyle and you're living in a loop. So those are two different things as well. So that's something to keep in mind. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're talking about there.
Okay. So the INFJ loop, it goes to introverted thinking, right? And introverted thinking is a very disconnected, emotionally disconnected, dispassionate, cold place specifically for an INFJ. There's always like an emotional disconnect to introverted thinking because it's the opposite of extroverted feeling, which is very connected. So introverted thinking, when a person goes to, like an IFJ goes to introverted thinking as part of their loop, is the purpose of that loop is to get a break from a sense of constant, sort of a feeling like they're beholden to everybody else. There's a sense that IFJs have that they're perpetually beholden to the world, that they're supposed to be doing stuff for other people at all times, but because they're introverts, they don't want to do that, right? They don't want to always have to be beholden to other people. And so whenever they feel a sense that they must go to their auxiliary or co-pilot function and they don't want to, that's when they go to introverted thinking or accuracy as their loop, because they're basically trying to make it so that it's not their fault that they're not doing the thing that extroverted feeling is telling them to do. So the loop gives them, it cuts them some slack. It gives them some sort of emotional space. It lets them off the hook, at least temporarily. And one of the characteristics of doing that, of like not feeling responsible, is by sort of projecting that responsibility onto other people in the sense of like, well, no, it's your fault, which is one of the reasons why an introverted intuition, introverted thinking bad loop often looks very critical, right? It's like, no, you're the bad person, I'm not the bad person. And the reason why there's that projection is because the INFJ or IFJ really feels like they are being a bad person because they're supposed to be responsible to everybody else, right? At all times. And
yeah, my husband is INFJ, and I think we had a bit of a rift a while back, and that's one of the things I did notice about it.
Right. So there's like this sense of like, I'm always supposed to be doing everything for everybody else. And a part of it is because extroverted feeling is a strong, powerful influence for IFJs, but it also is one that if they haven't mastered yet, they don't know, gives them the tools within it to have breaks through boundary setting. By getting their own needs met, right? Like the more you use extroverted feeling, the more seasoned you get at it, then the more you recognize that the function itself has tools for not having to be beholden to everybody else. But if you haven't quite developed that boundary setting, you haven't developed that ability to sort of like determine who's coming in and who's allowed in at what times, and whether or not their requirements are reasonable, or whether or not they're even requiring it, you just feel a sense of guilt because you think they're supposed to have it because you see a need going unmet. That's when the person gets into a loop, and it's very cold, it's very analytical, and it's usually very critical. And then there's like stronger and less strong versions of that. When INTJs go to introverted feeling, does that make sense, by the way? You said that you've seen that in your husband who's an INFJ.
Yeah, that's exactly what I noticed when all that went down, and also what he explained with that was going through his mind when that happened as well. Mm-hmm. For me, I noticed when I feel like I'm going into an unhealthy pattern, I start indulging in like feeling lots. It's really bad.
Mm-hmm. Well, so when an INTJ or an INTJ, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay.
When an INTJ goes into a loop, they go into their feeling space because the sense of irresponsibility that they're feeling is that they're not getting enough done, that they haven't set up a system they were supposed to set up, that they're not making things happen, that they're a loser, that they're not getting their shit together.
Not being proactive.
They're not being proactive, that they should be further along than they are. Like basically that extroverted thinking or effectiveness co-pilot is the proactive thing that's like, okay, get your act together, go make things happen, go get projects done. Like, why aren't you, like, you're a failure at life, right? Because you're not getting these things done, you're a failure. So it's less a sense that you're beholden to people and more a sense that you're beholden to whatever metric of you're supposed to be in a certain place by this age or whatever it is, right? Like whatever metric is inside of you. And so the avoidant tactic for an INTJ then is to go into introverted feeling and going like, yeah, but that's just not who I am. Like, that's just not me. Like, I don't feel that way. And so oftentimes
I want
to deny this.
Or I'm not that yet.
Right.
Often
Or
too.
I'm not, yeah. Like that's
I'll be that someday, but right now I'm not. So it's not my turn to take action.
Right. Or whatever it is. So like that sense of beholdenness, again, just like with an IFJ who's like, no, you're the bad person. The INTJ goes, no, I shouldn't have to. Why does the world require this of me? Why do they have such ridiculous expectations, right? And so then it's this sense of pride, right? Like this, like I like this shoulder, like or arms crossing, like I shouldn't have to do that. I shouldn't have to play by your rules, right? Like who I am is more important than what I do, right? So it goes into this whole like sort of like my identity should be more important than what I bring to the world, and who I am should have value. So it's more of like a pride issue. So is this resonating in like an uncomfortable way, you're saying?
Yes, this is horrible. It's like you're calling me out so badly, and yeah, I feel attacked.
Yeah, right? Don't at me, right? That's what I'm supposed to say. So,
Bring it, bro. I can take it.
Yep, you can take it. All right, feel it. All right. So, of course, with both of them, what you need to be doing is getting into the auxiliary function and seasoning it, right? Because effectiveness or extroverted thinking, when it's not very mature, just like extroverted feelings, like I'm beholden to everybody. Extroverted thinking is like I should be doing all the things, right? Which is unrealistic and unreasonable. But you know how it's kind of like that saying, You overestimate what you can get done in a month, but underestimate what you can get done in a year. That's sort of an extroverted thinking sort of insight, which is don't think you should be all things to all people yet, but you can actually get a lot accomplished if you focus and start building a system and start building a plan. So get to work. Extroverted thinking's answer is just get to work, right? And it doesn't matter whether or not you've hit the metric, the idealistic metric you're supposed to be at. Just don't worry about that. Just get to work. So, so that's the solution for that. Now, it sounds like you don't need me to talk about the ISFP one as much, but I will say that one of the characteristics of ISFPs is that they're avoiding entering a world that they think won't honor who they are, like as a person, right? Their emotions, they oftentimes feel very invalidated. They might just be in a very self-indulgent place, and they don't want to hear the messages from the world that interrupts whatever imaginative world they've created inside of themselves that they want to see as reality. And so what ends up happening is they end up going to introverted intuition or perspectives 10-year-old to imagine something that they then basically convince their senses that it has experienced. And so these are people who get very untethered from reality. Not in like an intuitive sort of like I always feel like an alien, but as in like they're like this is a sense of pride for them that they're not like other people. It's like I don't know if there's like a what is the Tumblr, sort of like back in the mid-teens on Tumblr, there was all those Tumblr kids who were like saying things like, I can't feel my wings when I'm sick. And it's like, okay, that person's very untethered from reality. And they probably are an ISFP that's in an introverted intuition loop, because introverted intuition is the imagination that they have wings, and they've convinced their extroverted sensing that this is a real thing that they're actually physically experiencing. So that's more of like sort of a detethering from reality sense. And they don't want to be tethered to reality. They don't want to have to to engage with the real world and get real world feedback, because that then ruins the fun of of whatever fairyland they're living in. Now, of course, that can take on multiple iterations and can look at a lot of different ways. But basically, an ISFP in a loop is convincing their senses that their imagination is real. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I actually have an ISFP friend. I do remember seeing her go down that pathway. I thought it was a grip. I was like, what's going on?
Right.
I thought that was a grip. I didn't know that was the loop.
Well, incidental, hard-hitting, bad day loops, which are very obvious and big. And then you can have more undercurrent, sustainable, this is how you experience your life for a while loops. So, so,
this was like for a few months that she went like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Some people spend their whole life in a loop. Yeah. So,
I think because of the way I was raised, I've noticed hit those loops a lot. And I've read sometimes that INTJ, when it's developed in an unhealthy way from a young age, because they had to cope by resorting to their tertiary function or something, they tend to develop into naturally using their NIFI more than NITFI. So I noticed that I do hit the NIFI a lot, but it doesn't feel like it's something sustainable or healthy at all. So I don't know how much truth there is to that.
Are you saying NISI as like the shorthand for the polarities, like NISE?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
NIFI.
Oh.
Sorry, I use Japanese vowels.
Phonetically.
Okay, got it. Yeah. All right. So like, I mean, INTJs, the other thing too is that how an INTJ manifests and how they grow up, like, yeah, there are a lot of contexts that are very friendly to how an INTJ shows up, but also your Enneagram type is going to probably come in here, and a bunch of other stuff. So INTJs can sort of develop.
I'm a 5.
Yeah. Okay. Which is pretty common for INTJs. So what happens on a lot of INTJ 5s, and do you know what your subtype is? Do you know if you're sexual, social, or self-preservation? It's okay if you don't.
SXSP.
Okay, so self-preservation 5. Okay.
SXSP,
Oh no,
yeah.
sexual 5.
No.
Oh, self-pres.
Sexual self-preservation. Yeah.
Okay.
Both, like in order of strength, SX is my strongest, SP is my second.
Got it. Okay, so sexual 5s, if I'm not mistaken, are actually quite romantic. They're the fives that have a tendency to like idealize like the sort of perfect other that they're looking for. And so an INTJ that's a sexual five can get into sort of a romantic.
It's not been for that. I heard it was. Sorry, you can correct me.
No.
I heard the SX for instinctual variance. It can be romantic, but it doesn't mean always towards people. It can also mean like wanting to merge with whatever you find a fascination with. Like, could be a topic, like get to know everything, absolutely everything about it deeply. It could be a person. It could be a hobby. It could be something like you want to just be in that groove with or something. That's what I heard the SX was. Is it only about people?
No, so I'm not talking about sexual. I'm talking about five sexuals, because the sexual piece, yeah, because I'm a sexual 3, and so yes, merging, creative merging, lots of like there are certain characteristics for sexual subtypes themselves, but I'm talking about the amalgamation of a sexual 5, because sexual 5s have very distinctive characteristics that don't necessarily follow. Like a sexual 5 is very different than a sexual 1 is. So the school of thought that we go with is Beatrice Chestnut's subtypes, and in her opinion, there's an alchemical response when you take this subtype or the instinct and merge it with the type. And so there are some characteristics of like the sexual instinct, but there's a very specific alchemical response when you merge the sexual instinct with a 5 specifically. So you as a sexual 5 would actually look different than me as a sexual 3. We're still going to have similarities. We're still going to want to like merge with people, and not in like a sexual romantic way necessarily. We just really enjoy intimacy. Like I would say that intimacy is like the favorite word of sexual subtypes, and that could be intimacy with anything. It could be, like you said, intimacy with a intimacy with a concept or whatever. But it's most fun when it's with the person. But specifically, sexual 5s have a characteristic of idealization of partnership. And I think it's part of that whole sort of wanting to find the perfect thing before moving forward. It's the ivory tower piece that's merged with the sexual subtype piece. And so it makes them almost weirdly romantic for a 5. And so sexual 5s that are INTJs can become weirdly romantic, like almost uncharacteristic, like in a way where most people don't think of INTJs as romantic, but a sexual 5 INTJ can be kind of weirdly romantic, looking for sort of that idealized partner. And in that way, they can have more of sort of what's the word?
Idealization?
Like more of a fantasy sort of relationship, and they can sort of live in their fantasies a little bit more, which I could see why somebody would want to make sure that they weren't an ISFP if they were a sexual 5 INTJ. We didn't lose you, right?
Saya's still here.
Okay, so she's still here.
You're here with us, right, Saya? Maybe we did lose her.
I think we actually might have lost her. So hopefully.
There we go. She's back.
Now you're back.
Hi.
Okay, there we go.
Sorry, I don't know what happened.
Somehow the headphone button got pushed on the thing.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you heard any of that or if you were on hold.
I heard it all except for just like the 15 seconds between me figuring out that I had disconnected and calling back in.
Okay.
That's it. So
All right.
I heard pretty much everything.
Okay, cool. All right. So I could see if an INTJ was a sexual 5, why they would want to go, I'm not an ISFP, right? But I'm hearing that you're vibing with the INTJ stuff, and maybe that loop is the one that feels the most like you.
Yeah, and it took a long time for me to even look at INTJ. The funny thing is, because I just, like, the tests kept bouncing around, and then when it finally hit INTJ, like, because I also started, after the test started bouncing around, I'm like, okay, this isn't reliable. How do I find my type? And then at one point, the test hit INTJ, and I look at it, all the stereotype stuff is what I read. I'm like, this can't be me. This can't be me. That's not me. That's impossible. And so I just kind of put it off. That was like one of the last ones I looked at, and then when I finally looked at it and just decided to step past the stereotypes and go off of what I knew of the functions,
yeah,
I go and join the group, and I find a lot more people that actually, like females specifically,
mm-hmm.
communicate like me, talk like me, think like me, and express like me. I'm like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
I've been mistyping myself for ages.
Well, congratulations on getting to that point. That's always like a really cathartic moment when you're like, especially like you said, when you get past the stereotypes. I mean, a stereotype of an ENTP is not really something I resonate with that much either. I mean, I am talky. I'm a know-it-all teacher. I do a lot of things that are very ENTP. But the idea of like being sort of like the earliest stereotypes that I saw of ENTPs were all like Doc Brown from Back to the Future. And I was like, I don't really identify with that. So getting rid of the stereotypes and like just looking at the functions and identifying that and then finding other people who are similar, like INTJ women in particular for you, that's the best way to go about it. So congratulations on finding your best.
Yeah, the INTJs, like when I finally realized I could be one and I got past the stereotypes, I was so pissed at the stereotypes. I was like, are you freaking serious?
Yeah. But I mean, they're helpful for some people, I guess, and they live for a reason. But yeah, cool.
Right, true. Like, because the general amount of them probably do exhibit those traits, but I think that's more of an overtime matured thing. They don't really talk about the other forms of development or unhealthy. They talk about the unhealthy, but it's really lesser talked about with INTJ. I found it's hard to find that info.
Yeah.
So,
well, especially with the
studying into functions really made it a little bit easier to kind of get a grasp of concept.
Yeah, totally. The whole concept of the like sort of the INTJ cold mastermind that's like twirling their mustache and steepling their fingers and trying to take over the world. I think that's why I think it's been like 5 years now, but I wrote an article about how INTJs are actually squishy and soft on the inside and way more emotional than they let on. And there was a couple of people who said that was the first time that they had ever heard anybody acknowledge that. And so it's like, you just gotta get to the nougaty center to really understand an INTJ.
Thank you.
And I found it's like, once you get to that squishy soft center, it's harder for me to lock back up against you, even if you totally do me wrong and I hate your guts. It's harder for me because I got used to being expressive around you. So it's really, really difficult to lock that back down, but it takes time and I can do it. But it's just like, you got to that point and I hate your guts for it.
Yep. Yeah, you sound very INTJ to me. All right. Did we answer your question? Do you feel good?
Thank you, Saya.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so
Awesome.
much for calling in.
Hope to hear from you again soon.
Yeah,
okay?
totally.
Tune back in on the next episode.
Thank you.
Thanks again for calling in.